Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Comics Lair. The Comics Lair is sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. This discussion will focus on the Doom Patrol. And let's start by having the panelists introduce themselves and briefly tell us which version of the Doom Patrol they first got into. Jeannie, will you start?
Sure, I'll happily start. I'm Jeanne Adams, and I write urban fantasy and paranormal romantic suspense and space adventure with my friend Nancy. And I first ran into the Doom Patrol when I stole my older brother's comics. And so my original introduction was to the ratty-tatty versions of the first run of the Doom Patrol from the 60s.
Okay. Fraser?
I'm Fraser Sherman. I write historical fantasy, film reference books, and other stuff. I first encountered the Doom Patrol when they teamed up with Flash and Brave and the Bold 65, the Silver Age version, obviously. I picked up some issues of the Doom Patrol book, and then in the 70s, I went back and eventually collected the whole run of them because I discovered I really loved the book. And that is definitely my favorite incarnation.
Okay. And Tim?
I'm Timothy Levine. I am just a very big comics fan. The last two conferences I've been at, I've been joking that I am, and not an academic, but I sometimes pretend to be one at conferences. I've done a couple panels now. I got into the Doom Patrol. Well, it's connected to how I first got into comics. When I first got into comics, it was because of the '89 Batman movie. And, as I will say frequently, it was a wonderful time to be an 11-year-old boy when that happened. It was just, changed my life. But not long after Batman, I got into the Titans, and then I went back and got some of the earlier issues of the Titans. And there was an arc in the very beginning of the New Teen Titans run, where they were searching for the killers of the Doom Patrol, and went up against Madame Rouge and with a Cliff and that kind of thing. So that was really my introduction to the team.
Okay. I'm Nancy Northcott, your host, as I said, and I write historical fantasy for Falstaff Books. I also write several different kinds of romance, and with Jeannie, my writing partner in crime, I write the Outcast Station science fiction series. I've been reading comics since I was 8 years old, and I don't really remember what the first issue of Doom Patrol I read was. Before we started recording, I mentioned that I had an allowance of 25 cents a week and comic books were 12 cents. So picking and choosing was required. And so I had no complete runs of anything. But I really thought the Doom Patrol were cool. And this, of course, was the Silver Age issue, as you probably guessed from the pricing. And so I've kind of paid attention to them off and on over the years, but I haven't really followed them intensely. So with that, let's just dive into the discussion. What do you like about the Doom Patrol when it's so different from other comic series? Fraser, will you start?
Yes, I think, okay, looking at the Silver Age Doom Patrol, partly that it was so different because this was an era when you didn't have the freak superheroes you see so often now. There was the Thing, but I didn't read much Marvel. There was Metamorpho and the Creeper, and there was the Doom Patrol, who were the most prominent. I think they appealed to me when I started collecting all the back issues in the 70s because they were a found family before that was a really common thing. And I think that meant more to me at the time than I realized because I was a very good boy growing up, and Beast Boy was not. He wanted to join the team. He couldn't at first because he needed his guardian's permission, and his guardian didn't even know he was Beast Boy. He was pissed off, he was mouthy, he was snarky, he was short-tempered, and there was, again, different from any other kid sidekick in comics. And I think at some level I was thinking, boy, I would like to be like that. I don't know that I ever would have been, but it appealed. Also, they could do really rotten things at times. There's one story. Rita and Larry are undergoing a treatment which will restore them to normal. They're both feeling conflicted because they know that means heading back out in the real world away from their found family, but they can't quite bring themselves to say no. Robot Man starts thinking about being left alone with the chief, and he snaps and smashes the machine. And even though they really don't want to go, he doesn't know, so it's kind of a selfish thing to do, but Arnold Drake was the writer for the whole run, makes it work. And that was not something you saw very often in the Silver Age.
That's true. Tim, what about you?
Well, I think it's very true. It's because they are different. I mean, probably my favorite incarnation is actually the TV show. I mean, I know Cyborg doesn't belong there. It's very clear Cyborg doesn't belong there. I think everyone who was watching it, who was any bit of a comics fan, knew that. But the TV show was really the best way to describe it is Gonzo, and you don't see many people sustainably do Gonzo and make it work for a couple seasons. And it was, I was telling, people back when it was on, what was it? Was it DC Universe? Before it was DC Universe Infinite. What was it even called? Does anyone even remember? Whatever the service was.
DC Universe, I think.
Just DC Universe. My wife and I had subscribed to it prior to these things getting absorbed by HBO Max, and we watched it, and I was telling people about this. No, this is really great. It's hilarious. It's offbeat. It's different. Yes, Cyborg doesn't belong there, but it was a really fun show. Really very funny at parts, very poignant at parts. Really enjoyed the offbeat characters, and made a point that they weren't a superhero team. And many of the writers who have tried to go back and do it realize that if they tried to make them too much of a superhero team, they made a mistake. I mean, I think Marty Pasco is on record saying, "Yeah, when I did the '70s revival, I tried to make them a superhero team, and I fundamentally didn't get what they were."
And Jeannie.
Well, I echo both what Timothy and Fraser have both said. I think that one of the things that appealed to me so much, and I think is key to them, is they're kind of for everybody who's felt out of place and wanted to be able to use their powers for good, but didn't quite know how, or had some darkness in their past where they'd made some bad choices and are trying to rectify it and still don't quite know how. They sort of stumble into doing good in some of the issues where they're like, yeah, that didn't work out exactly the way we had thought it would, but it actually worked out okay. And I think it sort of, in some ways, is oddly reassuring that there are maybe people out there who have a great deal of power, and sometimes they stumble into being good. And I also think that I think some of the outgrowth of the reason they were even remotely popular was because a lot of people in the 60s were really worried about the whole atomic age of the 50s, and the creatures from outer space, and what would happen if you do fly through a cloud of cosmic dust and suddenly it changes your DNA, or you turn into a blob and then become Elastic Girl and then Elasta Woman. How do you get on? Who do you talk to? And as Fraser said, the found family thing, to me, this was the first incarnation I had seen of that found family. And, all the way up to like the Goonies, you're like, as a kid, at least for me, seeing that the nerds and geeks and weirdos can actually find family together. That's one of the things I've always loved most about them.
Well, I never really stopped to analyze why I liked the book until I was preparing for this panel. And I agree with everything that everybody has said. And to take it a step farther, if the Silver Age Teen Titans put on their street clothes, they can walk down any street in America. Nobody's going to pay any attention to them. Same for the Legion of Superheroes in the 30th century. They take their costumes off, they walk out into 30th century metropolis. They're just a bunch of other teenagers walking through the city. The Doom Patrol can't really do that. Rita can do that, but nobody else can do that. And I think it's part of the found family aspect that she didn't desert them when she could have. She didn't go off on her own just to sit in the park and drink a soda, or this was before the age of lattes available on every corner. But one of the things that I really liked about it was the there was an arc that ran through those Silver Age stories where Steve Dayton, who was not hesitant to tell people he was the world's fifth richest man, was trying to persuade Rita that she should marry him. And unusually for a comic book character, her response was not, well, I can't marry you because my enemies would strike at you. Because he had the Mento helmet, so he had mental powers. And it wasn't, well, I would have to give up my career. It was, I don't want to. It's like, I don't want to. And that was really unusual for the period. I mean, yes, it was kind of obvious that Steve hoped she would stop running around with these weirdos and stretching and shrinking and all that stuff. But that was not her reason for not wanting to marry him. I mean, yeah, every time he'd say that, she'd go, I'm going to do that. But at bottom, her refusal was, I don't want to. And I sort of liked that. So she really was my favorite character. We can talk a little bit more about that as we move on along, because my next question is, picking any continuity, who is your favorite member of the team and why? And Fraser, we'll start with you this time.
For the Silver Age, I pretty much love all of them. I think I would go with Beast Boy. And he also got an arc. He had been orphaned. He was incredibly wealthy. His guardian, well, he told the Doom Patrol that I have this awful guardian and I'm convinced he's stealing my money and he doesn't know I'm Boost Patrol and he's an old skinflint and he's awful. And they were initially, yeah, talk to the hand. Then Rita spied on him and discovered it was absolutely true. Steve, being the fifth richest man in the world, tries to put enough pressure on him financially that Galtree the Guardian will fold. The Brotherhood of Evil gets involved, and it culminates in a story in which the Doom Patrol apparently die. And I knew they couldn't die because, you know, they had their comic book, but it was, they said at the end, they're dead. They're all dead. Oh my God, what's happening? And it turned out Madame Rouge of the Brotherhood had fallen for the chief, so she had tampered for the weapons setting and set it on non-lethal. And their romance, including her, started another arc. And eventually Galtree got exposed and Mento and Rita adopted Gar. So, yeah, much going on.
Yeah. Timothy, what about you?
I would probably have to go with Cliff, because Cliff is says the quiet part out loud, says the inappropriate things out loud type of character, but in a lot of ways is kind of the heart of the team too, even though he is like that. Going off going off of the TV show, Brendan Fraser, who does the voice for Cliff in that, is so fantastic doing it, and it's everything he says is always funny. He's always freaking out, and I just really kind of enjoy that because it's never meant to be the superhero team that has their act together all the time. It's always a bunch of characters just on the edge of making things worse and always kind of freaking out at everything.
Okay, and Jeannie.
Yeah, Cliff is like one of my favorites because he's actually the only one that's in every run. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't realized that because I noped out of a lot of the reboot. Is it Grant Morrison that did Harrison?
There's so many different reboots.
Yeah, but he's the one that's in all of them, and I like him. But I also like Negative Man. I like the Larry Trainer character, Negative Man. There's something about the idea of his powers that really intrigued me, even way back in the early run about, okay, what about that energy? And what do you do with that? And what he does with it, sometimes successfully and sometimes not. I always found that those storylines intriguing as to see what, when he's, sort of expelled the spirit. And sometimes, I mean, in the early run, it's like just the negative energy is from him passing through that cloud and when he's a test pilot. But I always found that energy thing such a fascinating thing. But Cliff as Robot Man is probably my absolute favorite.
Well, my favorite was Rita, which is probably not a surprise to anybody. To be a comics fangirl in the 1960s was to have a dearth of role models. Many years later, when I was in graduate school, I was going to do a master's thesis on the roles and capabilities of women as depicted in the comic books for a period immediately before and after the introduction of the Equal Rights Amendment. And so I had this friend who she had this archive in her attic, and I'm up there with my little 3x5 card scribbling summaries under her eaves. And I began to realize something as I was scribbling those summaries, which is that Rita was a stronger character internally, not necessarily physically, than Wonder Woman, because Wonder Woman frequently had to be rescued by Steve Trevor. And I don't know if that was mandated by editorial for goodness knows what reason, but Rita didn't need to be rescued. I mean, sometimes she did, but sometimes everybody in a group needs to be rescued. It was not the damsel in distress, and she was as prone to rescue one of the guys as to be rescued. And I think my little girl brain internalized that without really analyzing it. But I've always liked Rita, and that is one of the main reasons I could not watch the show, because it's the Silver Age Rita has it together, and she's really internally strong, and she's a force for the team. And TV Rita is a blob, and she's not okay with that. And so I know a lot of people loved it, and that's fine. It just was not for me. Does anybody want to add anything or pick up on anything anyone else said before we move on?
Well, in that original, I'll do that. Is in that original run too, it seemed to me, and I did a little backgrounding, remembering for preparing for this, that Rita got stronger the longer the run went on. And I don't know if that was intentional or unintentional, but to me, that was another part of the writers and illustrators sort of flipping off the regular comics and their regular teams, and the sort of standard let's be heroes kind of trope was that she just got stronger in every issue. She had some new trick up her sleeve.
I will say I like the Chief Silver Age version because he could frequently be a complete, much like sort of like Tim was saying about Cliff, a jerk. He wound up taking funding from General Immortus without knowing it because he had a loud mouth and he kept pissing off people who might have written him checks. In one story, he has a huge argument with the team. Everyone walks out. Someone comes gunning to kill him. His first thought is, I need to call the police. And then he thinks, and that's admitting I can't survive without the aid of the Doom Patrol. I'd sooner die. And he almost does.
Well, can I...
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say, does anybody have something to add?
Can I ask all of you, since it seems like all of you guys were around for the original incarnation, I just a few days ago read the final issue of the Silver Age Doom Patrol where they all get killed, and it had the framing sequence basically begging readers to write in if you wanted to save the Doom Patrol. Did any of you guys do that?
I did not read it until several years later. This was in the transition from England to America, and I lost touch with comics, so no, I had no opportunity to write in.
I never wrote to letter columns or anything like that. I have friends who actually got letters published, and we were also impressed that they got letters published, but I never took a shot at it, so I didn't do that. But I did read that the reason the book ended was because of declining sales, which, as we all know, happens all too often.
And I didn't read them until well into the late 70s, early 80s. They were very tattered and worn, and it was the original run, but I didn't read them until much, much later.
Also,
I would have probably written, had I written them, please save them, they're so cool.
Well, it wasn't a factor as in canceling the book, as far as I know. Arnold Drake had been part of a push to get better writers' benefits for DC's freelancers, and he had been shown the door. And if you look back at the first page, originally he had been on it because he was the writer of the book for the entire run, and they had edited him out and put in Murray Boltinoff, the editor. So that kind of sucked.
Wasn't there a push to unionize at that point? And
I believe so. I've heard different and varying accounts, but it seems like at least tentative discussions of union, or at least pensions or better pay rates. So something to give them a better deal.
And that was when they brought in a lot of the Charlton people too, to kind of replace some of them, wasn't it?
I think the Charlton actually came in earlier from the way when Steve Ditko, sorry, we're going slightly off.
Sorry.
That's all right. Go ahead.
He came on board and he introduced the Creeper, who was another extremely weird hero. And I've been rereading my Silver Age stuff over several years, and when they get to the point where the Creeper's about to debut, they've got Steve Ditko is at DC. So I think he was the guy who co-created Spider-Man.
Mhm.
So I think they consider that a serious coup, and Creeper was obviously tailored to peel off some of Spidey's audience. It did not work. It died after 6 issues. But no, I don't think they were bringing him in to replace anyone at that point.
Well, and I'm sorry to anyone who is having issue number 121 spoiled for them, but that issue is literally decades. So if you are intrigued by this, you should go find it and read it.
It is very good.
It is very good. And that was, off the top of my head, I can't think of any other superhero team that was dead.
Yeah.
They were dead.
It was really ballsy for the time. I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
Arnold,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, Arnold Drake also wrote Challenges of the Unknown for a while and killed off one of their members, which was, when you've got a 4-member team, it's pretty drastic. But yeah, wiping out the entire team rather than just letting them go off into limbo, that was radical.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I thought they were all pretty all the issues in that original run were pretty radical in the sense that, this was an era when nobody talked about mental health issues and nobody talked about people being just having some odd proclivities. And there were times I remember, like I said, looking back through some of the stuff just to remind myself and refresh myself. I remember thinking back then, golly, these people were smoking some stuff when they wrote these and came up with these scenarios, especially for the chief. I'm thinking, y'all were smoking some stuff.
Well, it was that era, wasn't it? I mean,
yes, indeed it was.
Yeah. I will take a slight pause and mention Bruno Premiani. This does not relate directly to Doom Patrol, but he was the artist for the entire Silver Age run. He also has the distinction of being kicked out of both Argentina and Spain for having drawn anti-fascist cartoons that pissed off the government. So, salute.
Show him.
Yes.
Well, good for him. One of the things I read this afternoon was a Wikipedia article on the Doom Patrol, and it hypothesized, sort of in passing without really citing much to support the idea, that the Doom Patrol inspired the X-Men, but themselves were inspired by the Fantastic Four. So what do you all think about that?
Does anyone else want to go for?
Go ahead.
I mean, you could take that even a step further and say the Fantastic Four was inspired by the Challengers of the Unknown, and you keep on cycling these things. It's hard to say. I think I read something recently that there was enough talk between the two companies at that time that even though the Doom Patrol technically did come out before the X-Men by a few months, the other one may have known what was going on, and which was first which concept was first is somewhat debatable, I think.
Yes, there is. I have never heard the Fantastic Four inspiration. It's always been either the X-Men ripped off the Doom Patrol, or the Doom Patrol ripped off the X-Men, or it could simply be that both of them, weird team of special freaks, came out together. Stan Lee has given another theory is that the X-Men were meant to be modeled on the Fantastic Four. Martin Goodman wanted to, the Fantastic Four had been a hit. Give me another team, all of whom wear identical uniforms and have special powers. So, and Arnold Drake was definitely influenced by Stan Lee's style of writing. He was the DC writer, maybe the only one of that period who could actually do stories the Marvel way and make it work and not look forced. But beyond that, I don't know that it was particularly influenced by it, that there was any direct influence from Marvel properties. Though, yeah, as Tim says, you can speculate on who influenced what, and it's always possible because there are precedents for just about everything.
Yeah.
You look back at it, from hindsight, you can go, well, they share certain characteristics, but I'm sort of with Fraser. I don't think that you could circular, or Timothy actually said it too, is you can circularly go, well, this, then that, then this, but I don't know, Doom Patrol is so odd to me in the
Yeah.
whole pantheon of the comics. They're just odd in terms of the things they took on and the villains they faced and their own powers and their own internal things that you're like, yeah, that's just different.
Yeah, I mean, the arch enemies are a brain in a jar and an evil super genius talking gorilla.
And a woman who
Now,
changed her.
did they have the plot in the Silver Age that the gorilla and that
No, they were
Sharmala
not.
and Brain were in love with each other? Was that?
No, there were.
No.
That was an addition by Grant Morrison.
That was a Morrison. Okay.
Yes. No, there were no openly gay characters of any sort in the Silver Age that I can recall at all.
Well, you're not even openly gay, cross species too, you know.
Well, yeah.
That would have been very brave for the Silver Age, I think.
Yes.
So yeah, but that actually kind of leads into what I wanted to talk about next is, do you have a favorite villain for the Doom Patrol? And Timothy, will you start?
I have to think about that. Can I pass and come back if you don't mind?
Sure. Jeannie?
Oh gosh. Yes, I do. What's her name? I can't remember her name.
Madame Rouge?
Madame Rouge. She's my favorite because she's such a good villain. And, much sort of a nod to your comment, Nancy, it was like she was a little bit like Natasha of Natasha and Boris. She was brilliant and sneaky. And, kind of the lull them into a false sense of security, stab them in the back. And yet she had some redeeming qualities. Because as I recall, she saves Cliff at least once, I think twice in that original run. I don't know. I just like her. I just think she's a great villain.
Okay. Fraser?
I don't know that I could really pick a favorite villain. I have a fondness for General Immortus, who was an immortal criminal mastermind who was their first villain in the first issue. And he was always very cunning, a brilliant strategist. But after the Brotherhood of Evil came along, they were so much weirder and more colorful, he pretty much faded into the background, which is a shame. I wouldn't say he's my favorite, but I would have liked to see him get more action than he did.
And Timothy, you ready?
I probably would go with Mr. Nobody, who was, a Morrison creation and all. I think a Morrison creation, and also in the TV show as well. Just because it was weird, it was wonderfully weird.
Well, speaking of villains, what did you all think of the Chief's character switching from a really good guy who helped everybody to a manipulative individual who appeared to do good, but only when it was going to benefit him? Timothy, do you want to start?
From what I had read, not having read the original Silver Age stuff, I kind of always had that impression of the Chief. I don't know where I picked that up. I mean, because I didn't read any of the Morrison run until recently, but I kind of had that impression of that character that, yeah, there's something else going on there.
Okay. Jeannie?
Yeah, I've already stated that.
Yeah.
Not a fan. Because, in the original run, he's hapless in some respects. He made this bad bargain. He's making this serum that's supposed to be immortal, and then he's trying to rectify that problem. And then once everything explodes on him, then he's trying to help all these other people. And to me, that's the only part of the Doom Patrol that is actually the team aspect, is that he's collecting all these people so that they don't feel alone. Mm-hmm. And so he doesn't feel alone, right? So then when they change him to be this sort of mastermind where he's actually causing these things because he believes that it'll create essentially a master race. I wasn't big on that because it smacked of a lot of things I don't think are very good. So yeah, that Morrison run I didn't like because it really did. He was already a super flawed character, and I liked that about him, but he was flawed in a way that I could live with. Mm-hmm. Whereas as in the newer run, he's flawed in a way that's so manipulative and so deeply manipulative that I'm like, I'm out.
And Fraser, what about you?
I like the Morrison run a lot. I give him points for trying to make a Doom Patrol that was weirder proportionately for the 80s instead of just reusing the Silver Age ones. But yeah, that ending just pissed me off. And I mean, it was established the Chief performed the surgery that created Turncliffe into Robot Man. He got the bandages that enabled Larry to walk around without killing everyone with his radiation. But yeah, the turnaround that he's actually a diabolical evil. I think it's part of there is a general tendency to take anyone who is an authority figure in a Silver Age comic and make him into a gigantic dick. The Guardians are dicks in Jeff Johns' Green Lantern. Professor X is probably beyond dick, and if you add up all the things that they have credited him with under different writers, he's an evil monster. Chief, just more of the same. So, but yeah, I'm more annoyed when it happens to the Chief because I care more about the Doom Patrol.
Cosmic Boy as the time trapper. Woo.
Yeah.
And I actually kind of wish they bring that back though, because I kind of really liked that arc where they revealed that, but I'm going way off into a tangent here.
Well, but that's okay because we were talking about changing around characters. And I don't like, just as a reader in anything, to find that a character that I've liked and that I've been rooting for has actually been evil all along. And yeah, there's a lot of writing skill required in making that work and making it believable. But as a reader, I don't care for it.
Well, it's particularly that whenever they want to write off a character, they decide to make them evil. And it's like, well, what about the 100 issues of good this character is? I'm thinking of like Professor Hamilton in the Superman comics, where they just all of a sudden one issue he's evil now, and it's like he's been helping Superman for like 20 years.
Yeah, that's like Whiplash, you know?
Yeah.
You're like, wait, what? I'm sorry.
Leslie Tompkins in Batman, his friend since childhood, and they did an arc where she supposedly murdered Stephanie Brown, who was Robin, or spoiler at the time, except it turns out she didn't. Again, same thing.
Yeah, well, that was more they were trying to have her make a sanctimonious point against Batman, and it was stupid, and I realized why they retconned it, but it was. I could almost kind of see that in her character. But, some of the other stuff, it's just, the character does a total 180.
Well, and I think sometimes it's the writer is brand new and they are given the instruction, make this fresh. And for some, the only way they can think to make it fresh is, okay, what do we do here? Let's make them a bad guy all along. And it is a way to start over. It is a way to retcon things. I never have thought it. I always think it's a cheap shot. And I personally always think it's a real kind of middle finger to all the writers who came before you. Who and Nancy, of course, will wax poetic about the way they did that to Nightwing.
Yeah, don't get me started.
Yeah, we could spend another hour on that.
We could.
Well, I think it's often when a new writer is hired and they're told, okay, we don't want more of the same. So give us something new. And they're like, crap, what am I going to do now?
Well, I'm just thinking of the story where Ron Mars was hired for Green Lantern and he was told to get rid of Hal Jordan in any way possible. That was literally what he was hired to do on Green Lantern. Get rid of Hal Jordan, create a new Green Lantern. However you want to get rid of him. And, he made him evil, but what else are you going to do?
Yeah. Tom Brevoort, who is a longtime Marvel editor, had a comment on his blog once that what he sees a lot is somebody takes over a book and it's like upbeat with a tight found family or whatever, and they hate that vibe, so they decide to turn it into something completely different. And the end result is you alienate the fans and you don't get anything good, and figure out what makes people like the book and try to work with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm not familiar with Mr. Nobody except for the little bit that I watched on the show, or with Crazy Jane.
Mm-hmm.
But if Jeannie, do you know those characters?
I just know him from what little I watched of the TV show. I actually thought the Crazy Jane character was brilliantly imagined
Mm.
and well acted from the little bit I saw. And that the concept, the idea of this person have multiple personalities and each personality has a superpower. It's like, ooh, the possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Timothy, you've seen the show. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I enjoyed both of those characters. I mean, there was a lot of the good things that were in the show were it was the same kind of vibe and concepts of the Morrison run, just rearranged a lot. And I enjoyed Jane in the comic and in the show. That was pretty interesting. Mr. Nobody, I think they changed a little bit more for the show, but I did, enjoy him in both the comics and the show.
I think Diane Guerrera as Crazy Jane did an amazing job.
Fraser, are you familiar with those characters from the comics or only from the show?
I'm familiar with both. Mr. Nobody was like a third-tier Brotherhood of Evil member originally, who then turned himself into Mr. Nobody in a freak experiment, recruited the Brotherhood of Dada because he decided everything about life is meaningless. So we shall lead a legion of meaningless. And it was one of the Morrison's more interesting creations. Jane was his main addition to the team. He was a good character in his run, and I like her on the show, and that's given her enough of a profile. She's also in the Unstoppable Doom Patrol, which Tim mentioned,
which was
really fun.
Which was I really like that. That was very good.
Okay, well, now let's switch gears. If you were going to reboot the Doom Patrol, who would you have in it, and how would you do it? Fraser, will you start?
Well, on the one hand, I really hate the endlessly retconning out of past stuff. On the other hand, there has been so much mess. I would retcon out the Chief's evil history. I would have him on it. Some of the Silver Age team, Crazy Jane, and I'm not sure, which is pretty much the makeup of Unstoppable Doom Patrol. And I am not sure where I would go from there. I mean, the thing that drives me nuts about most of the post-Morrison Doom Patrol is that they can't think of anything more imaginative than, let's do some sort of the classic Silver Age Doom Patrol and pretend that the Chief isn't totally evil so we can get the whole team with maybe a couple more members. And they're not really trying to get any sort of a weird vibe to it, and that just frustrates me. I would do something weird. I have no idea what. Okay.
Timothy?
I actually, I wouldn't even honestly agree with the question. I wouldn't reboot them at this point. I think that Unstoppable did get close enough to the classic elements while still moving it forward. I mean, you had the team that basically you had Cliff, you had Rita, you had Larry, and you had essentially Jane becoming the chief. She was still Jane, but she was acting as the chief of the team. And there was this new, was it Beast Girl? What were they? Anyone remember what they were calling that character? A kind of a Beast Boy substitute character, but she was more of a monster animal type of character. I think it might have been Beast Girl. I can't remember now, but it was enough of a thing where they got enough of the core elements without having to reboot it again, which would have been like the fifth or sixth time. They got enough of those there that I think that's a good place for them to go from.
Okay. Well, is there anything that, well, it seems like there was something else I wanted to talk about and I got sidetracked, which happens from time to time. But it appears to be totally banished into the ether. So we're just not going to worry about it. And if there's anything else, I remember what it was. The Crazy Jane storyline with childhood abuse in her background, and then the gene bomb giving these powers, giving each personality these powers, seems to me like the kind of story you really couldn't have done in the Silver Age and possibly not in the Bronze Age. Mm-hmm. And I would say the same thing about the origin story that they gave Larry in the TV show, where he was gay and was in love with another pilot or another Air Force guy. And, you know, you couldn't do that in the days of the Comics Code. So would you like to see more stories like that? Not that put the characters through the ringer, but that are a little edgier than maybe we used to read? Or was one of the runs that's already extant good for you? Jeanne, you want to start?
Well, to answer the previous question, if I were rebooting it, I would reboot it with some of the lower tier characters like Celsius and some of the others having much more agency and being much more prevalent. But in terms of having characters, I don't know how I would feel about that.
Okay. Well, sorry I skipped you on the other one.
That's all right.
Fraser, what about you?
Okay, so what is the question exactly?
Would you like to see more sort of in-depth psychological stories that could not have been done in the early ages of the Doom Patrol, or do you feel the characters have been explored enough?
I think as far as the Doom Patrol goes, I'm not sure. I think they have been explored enough. I don't want to discover. I mean, TV show is separate, and what they do on there, cool. In the comics, I don't really want them to reveal that Cliff had a tragic abused past or whatever. In fact, I love Crazy Jane, but in general, comics have grown to use way too much abuse as a backstory origin for, oh, he's a villain because he was abused. Oh, she's a hero because she was abused, whatever. No, some people are just ordinary after that. But I think Jane's backstory is great. I think Larry's story worked on the TV show. But if you're going to do that, I'd sooner see, well, with the Doom Patrol at least, bring in new characters and not rework the old ones.
Okay. And Tim, will you wind it up?
Well, I think you run the risk of trying to be edgy for the sake of being edgy. And I think I would only want them to see them explore more stuff like that if they have the right writer who really knows how to handle it well. I mean, when Morrison did it, Morrison was Morrison, and not many people can do what he does. Sure. You run the risk of becoming like X-Force or something like that if you just do, edgy stuff for the sake of being edgy, or violent stuff for being. I mean, a lot of the Morrison stuff, in the Morrison run, they had the whole thing with Larry merging with a black woman and being known as Rebus. And then you have Cliff constantly misgendering him or calling him by Larry when he insists, or they insist their name is no longer Larry, they're Rebus. And there's this whole recurring thing where Cliff keeps on calling them Larry, which is not something I think many people even thought about prior to like 3 years ago.
Morrison has come out as non-binary, so it may have been personal for him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are coming up on time. Is there anything that anybody wants to talk about that we have not already touched on?
I just want to say all the Silver Age issues are, I believe, reprinted in paperback, nice, pretty-looking editions, so you can find them if you want them. Also, all the Morrison issues.
I have the omnibus of the Silver Age. I have not read many of them. I have lots of omnibuy on my shelves, but there is a giant omnibus which may still be in print. I don't know. DC is weird about keeping a lot of stuff in print.
The omnibuses are gorgeous, but yes.
Yeah, there is, however, a pretty good used book market for a lot of those things. Not everything, but a lot of things. And Jeanne, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Nothing to add, but thank you for asking.
Well, then let's wrap it up. We'll go around, and if each of you will tell people where they can find information about you or about your work. If you have a recent, new, or upcoming release that you want to highlight, this would be a great time to do that. Jeanne, will you start?
Sure. You can find me at jeanneadams.com. You can find me on most social media as at Jeanne Adams. You can find me here on ConTinual a whole lot. And my latest release is a short story in the Mercedes Lackey anthology, Anything with Nothing.
Fraser.
I'm Fraser Sherman, and you can find me at frasersherman.com, Fraser, funny spelling. Most of my books are on Amazon. I will have Southern Discomfort, which is a historical fantasy set in 1973 in Georgia, coming out in September from my publishing imprint, Behold the Book, and Savage Adventures, which is coming out about the same time, about the old Doc Savage pulps.
Okay, and Timothy.
I generally do not have much of a social media footprint or an online footprint. I do like to hang out on, there is the Tapatalk Collected Editions forum. I usually hang out on the DC boards there. I like to refer to people, go there. It's the place where grown-ups go to talk about comics. So it's always pretty interesting there. A lot of pros show up there. Mark Waid and Roger Stern will frequently show up there, and some other pros will hang out up there. I post as, I think it's either Haas TBL or Haas TBL1, one of those two, and probably annoy too many people there. But yeah, that's it for me.
Okay, and you can find me here in the Comics Lair. I do have a website that's currently woefully out of date, nancynorthcott.com. On X, that used to be Twitter, I'm at Nancy Northcott. On Blue Sky, at Nancy North. And I'm occasionally on Facebook. I'm most often on my street team, Nancy Northcott Street Team. But the best place to interact with me on social media is X. So I'd like to thank all the panelists for participating in this discussion of the Doom Patrol. Thank you to everyone who's watching. And thank you to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more information, visit heroesonline.com.